Hi, Michelle Glass here. Welcome back to another episode in our Chapter 6, Lecture 6 series. And our topic for this presentation is a homeostatic negative feedback mechanism for blood calcium regulation. Okay, so we have talked about the skeleton as having a job for mineral storage. And one of the minerals that is storing is calcium. Calcium is, of course, important for the hardness of bone, calcium, phosphorus, and other calcium salts. We talked about making the bone hard. But we will see that, if the skeleton is going to store calcium, that means not only can it stick it in the bone to make it hard, but it can take that calcium out to be used by other cells in the body. This is a negative feedback mechanism. So remember, I talked to you at the beginning of the semester about looking at this like a figure eight, where we have our homeostatic level that's normal. And if our calcium levels are getting too high, we're going to take some actions to bring it back down. And if our calcium levels become too low, we're going to take some actions to bring it back up. So in the case of our negative feedback mechanism loop, it's like a figure eight. And it's constantly fluctuating then around that homeostatic normal. We're seeing a quick return versus a positive feedback mechanism. Okay, so I've mentioned that calcium is important for lots of other cells, not just to make your bone hard. We're going to see its role in the nervous system and the muscular system as we move forward in the course. So we'll be talking about calcium's job later on in the semester, but right now we can just say, okay, it's important for the nervous system to function correctly. It's important for muscles to contract correctly. Not just skeletal muscle, but we'll see cardiac muscle and smooth muscle as well. So clearly very important. As a result, those blood calcium levels have to be highly regulated. We need to make sure it's at our homeostatic normal. And we'll see that 99% of the calcium in the body will be stored in the bone. So clearly this is an important place where we can either, if we have extra calcium, we can store it away, stick it in the bone. If we don't have enough calcium, well, that's okay. We've stored some in the bone. So let's go ahead and access that calcium. We're going to be looking at 3 different hormones that are going to be involved in regulating this negative feedback mechanism. When we talk about hormones, remember these are chemical messengers that are released into the bloodstream, and they travel to different tissues called target tissues. And I like to say these are the tissues that the hormones talk to, okay? So we're going to see 3 different types of target tissues involved in calcium regulation. The bone, of course, we've already talked about it as a place where we can store calcium. So that means we can either stockpile it away or we can pull it out to be used by the body. The kidney has a role in excreting extra calcium, and so we can also kind of turn that valve off and we can retain calcium if we don't have enough. And then the small intestine is going to be important because that's where we absorb nutrients from our diet. And calcium is, of course, we're getting it from our diet, so that's going to be an important area as well. Okay, so let's look at the bottom part of our figure eight. What is going to happen when our blood calcium levels are too low? And you can put yours like in a linear sequence if you want in your notes, but I'm going to try to actually construct that kind of a circle sort of idea. Okay, so when calcium levels are too low, we will see a gland called the parathyroid gland releasing a hormone named after the gland. So the hormone is here in this pink color, our parathyroid hormone. Now all hormones, for the most part, are assigned an abbreviation as well as a full name. So go ahead and start memorizing that PTH stands for parathyroid hormone. Now this hormone is going to talk to both our bone and our kidney. At our bone, it's going to talk to those osteoclasts. It's going to increase osteoclast activity. Remember, osteoclasts have the job of osteolysis, which means to break down that bony matrix. When you break down that bony matrix, the calcium is released into the blood for the other cells to use. At the kidney, remember, its job is looking at excretion. So if we don't have enough calcium, we don't want to get rid of any extra. So we're going to decrease excretion, and the kidney is going to make a second hormone shown here in that same kind of pinky purple color called calcitriol. So at the kidney, we're going to tell the kidney to decrease excretion of calcium, keep it in the body, and we're going to increase the release of a hormone called calcitriol. That calcitriol hormone is going to go through the bloodstream and talk to the small intestine. At the small intestine, it's going to trigger an increase in calcium absorption from the diet. So we've already seen that we're releasing calcium from the bone, and instead of getting rid of extra calcium, we're keeping it in the body, and now we're taking on additional calcium from our diet. So if we take on additional calcium from our diet, if we retain calcium that we already have in the body instead of letting it leave the body with the urine, and if we release our stored calcium from the bone, collectively all of these things together are going to help return our calcium levels to normal. So when blood calcium levels are too low, we get parathyroid hormone and calcitriol both being released in order to bring our calcium levels back up to normal. So you need to be familiar with each of these hormones, what tissue makes them, what tissue they talk to, and how we're going to actually bring those calcium levels up. So basically, this kind of diagram. Okay, so let's look at the flip side. So now this was the bottom half of our figure eight. So now let's look at our top half of our figure eight. So what's going to happen when our calcium levels are too high? So again, I'm going to kind of draw mine so it makes that top circle of the 8. If you are more comfortable making like a linear kind of note taking, you know, go with that. That's fine. Okay, so when calcium levels are too high, we have a different gland called the thyroid gland, which is going to release a different hormone called calcitonin. What is kind of interesting here is that the thyroid gland is located in the neck area, and then on the back side of the thyroid gland, you have the parathyroid gland. So they're anatomically connected to each other. So that's kind of interesting. The calcitonin is a hormone, so it's going through the bloodstream and it's talking to target cells. It is talking to cells at the bone and also cells at the kidney. So we see a pattern here that we had before. At the bone, we're going to decrease osteoclast activity. So instead of releasing our stored calcium, we're just going to continue. We're going to let osteoblasts do what they've been doing this whole time. So we're going to just continue adding calcium into bone and not releasing any of that calcium. At the kidney, we're going to decrease the release of the calcitriol, so that pretty much slows or stops the absorption of calcium from our diet, so we're not taking on any additional new calcium. And we're going to go ahead and get rid of that extra calcium at the kidney, so we're increasing excretion. So we're basically doing the opposite of what we saw a few minutes ago. If you decrease your osteoclast activity, no calcium is being released from the bone. Instead, you're just continuing osteoblast activity, building bone activity, so you're continuing to store calcium in the bone. Because you've decreased your amount of calcitriol, you are decreasing or stopping your amount of calcium absorption from your diet. So you could still be, keep on eating that ice cream cone, but that calcium is just going to move on through the body rather than move into the bloodstream. And then, of course, if you are increasing your excretion, then you're excreting that extra calcium in the urine. When we have all three of these activities happening together, that is going to be enough to return your calcium levels to normal. So now we're back to our homeostatic normal. Okay, so here's kind of our summary. When your calcium levels are too high, we have the thyroid gland releasing calcitonin. Ultimately, we're going to get a decrease of osteoclast activity, increase of excretion, and a decrease of calcitriol, so that we are storing calcium in the bone rather than releasing it. We're getting rid of extra calcium in our urine, and we're not absorbing calcium from the diet. And that's going to return to normal. In the opposite scenario, when your calcium levels are too low, the parathyroid gland is going to release parathyroid hormone, which is going to increase osteoclast activity. So we're going to be releasing it from our bone. Or decreasing excretion. So instead of letting it leave the body with the urine, we're going to keep it, move it back into the bloodstream. We're going to increase our release of calcitriol. The kidney is releasing the calcitriol, which is talking to the small intestine, increasing our absorption of calcium from our diet. And so again, we're seeing in that case, those different activities are working together to bring our calcium levels to normal. Okay, that is our first and really our only negative feedback mechanism that we're going to learn in detail this semester. So you can expect to have questions here, of course, on your exam for this unit, as well as your departmental final. And it's important to note that these hormones are discussed again next semester when you're in the endocrine chapter. So you will see these again. So you should definitely make sure you're comfortable and familiar with this feedback mechanism system. Okay, and that's it for now.